How might the digital marketing landscape shift in 2021? Will mobile-first design accelerate in the new year? Should brands invest more in internal communications as remote and hybrid work conditions persist? What can companies do to increase their chances of media coverage? Welcome to the Adlibber podcast, featuring conversations of influence, some of it planned, much of it ad-libbed.
Thanks for tuning back into the Adlibber. I'm your host, Jay Scott. On today's episode, we look ahead to 2021 and pinpoint some of the branding and communications trends that our team at Gavin is anticipating for the year ahead. I've asked three of our senior strategists to join me on the Adlibber today. We have Bill Daber, Director of Digital Marketing and Web Services, Rick Holberg, Vice President of Creative Strategy and Branding, and Rick Dunlap, Public Relations Account Director. Gentlemen, no time like the present, so let's jump in and talk about 2021 trends. I'm going to start this out with Bill. We're going to talk a little digital. Bill, as we move into 2021, we're thinking ahead. What shifts can we expect to see take shape in digital marketing services? Like, what are some new platforms, maybe regulations that might be changing the landscape that you have your eye on?
So I think originally all of the digital landscape was kind of focused on one or two really big things, right? So it was Google and it was Facebook. Those were kind of the two juggernauts in the room. But what you're going to see moving forward, I think, is going to be a couple things. You're going to see the landscape and where you're going to find people is going to fracture, and you have to be a lot smarter about where you're looking for them. And I think that there's going to be a lot of things that pop up because of privacy concerns. So we'll start with kind of the fracturing of the landscape. So in 2020, despite the fact that we had the pandemic and everybody has been signing on to social networks and people have been doing a lot more things digitally, connecting with people through other platforms, Facebook actually managed to lose about 15 million users in the US. And where that used to kind of be a place you could find everybody, the platforms are all kind of growing in users outside of, Facebook, the juggernaut, and they're finding homes on new platforms which are growing rapidly. So that's places like Pinterest, that's places like very specific sites, LinkedIn for businesses. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of campaign dollars shifting away from Facebook and going after those audiences. If you're looking to rent out event space, you're going to put that in front of the right audience, which might not be on Facebook. If you're selling business to business, same exact kind of idea. You might want to put that on LinkedIn as opposed to putting it on Facebook. So I think that you're going to see kind of a fracturing of where people are looking for their clients and where they're looking to spend their digital money. And I think that that's probably going to be good because you can get your message in front of people in a much more effective way rather than just say, well, let's put it on Facebook because that's where everybody is. So I think you'll see that kind of shift, but I also think that privacy is going to kind of really change what everything looks like. So at the beginning of this year, Google announced that they're phasing out third-party tracking cookies, which is kind of what a lot of digital campaigns now rely on. You go to a website and you can be tracked by your interests by other websites based on these third-party cookies that are installed. Well, the big change is going to be that Google wants to phase those out, and Apple in a very large way already has, and their browser saturation from their products has actually gotten to be pretty substantial in the last couple of years. So I think you're going to see that third-party tracking kind of becomes a little more difficult unless you want to play in Google's privacy sandbox is what they're calling it. But I think that you'll also see first-party data becomes really important. So that's, when your clients or when your users are interacting with you in the digital space, collecting that information and knowing how to leverage it to create your next digital campaign is going to become really important because that information is not going to be able to be grabbed from other sources anymore. So I think that that's going to be the big shift you see is going to be, privacy related stuff, especially with the regulations. The GDPR for the European Union came out, which kind of dictates that's the pop-ups you get on the website sometimes that say about cookies, like, do you accept these cookies? They make it very granular for the user to opt in or opt out of any kind of tracking stuff. And so far, both California and New York have passed legislature that's not as comprehensive, but is moving in that direction of user privacy. So I think that, as marketing teams, you have to be cognizant of all those changes to make sure that, number one, you're in compliance, because the worst thing you could do would be running some kind of campaign that's going to get you fined by some regulatory body, but also just to update with the technology, because it's not digital advertising in the next 3 years is not going to look like it does right now. So it's just following what those new trends are and those new technologies and leveraging them as they become available.
Mr. Holberg, we've been seeing this trend where consumers are seeking a deeper human connection with brands. likely intensify as we go into the new year. How can we as an agency or as marketing professionals in general help brands satisfy this demand through design?
Yeah, Jay. So one of the things that we're seeing, I mean, obviously, if you look at a lot of the visuals that have been in the marketplace in 2020, everyone's wearing masks, and you have to be, because you have to show your responsibility to address the pandemic. But as we move forward into 2021, we don't know what that's going to look like. But I think people are still going to be in images that'll take place in any kind of design criteria. I think you'll see that people are still going to be wearing masks. But the really important thing is that in your images, you are showing people. Even though people are scattered now, they're sitting in their home. We're sitting here behind Zoom screens. We're social distancing. Even though that's taking place, wherever there's any kind of design criteria that we need to show any kind of visuals, those visuals need to show people relating to one another, even if they do have masks on. Ideally, as we move into 2021, like we said, we don't know what it'll look like in a few months, but as the pandemic gets under control, we have a vaccine, we'll start to see people taking away those masks as appropriate. And we'll need to make sure that we stay on top of what that really looks like for each individual brand. Another thing that I'm seeing with making that deep personal connection is that brands are starting to use a lot of hand-drawn elements. And the reason they're doing that is because it's inherently personal. It was created by a human being. It's not a digital snapshot of people, but any kind of imagery that involves hand-drawn elements, whether it's illustrations, even typography. So calligraphers are going to see a resurgence in 2021. These beautiful flowing hand-drawn typography and logo designs, I think they're also inherently personal and can make a brand feel that way as well.
Let's shift to PR for a minute. Rick, communications is always top of mind for us, for our clients. We can't escape it. It's something that we do. We live and breathe it every day. This year, obviously a higher focus on things like health and safety for points that, Rick just mentioned, and how we kind of communicate organizational changes during a pandemic. I wanted to ask you about internal communications. Certainly feels like something that's going to be a more critical piece of, the overall communication strategy that companies have. As we're all working remotely, or we might be in a more hybrid model next year where we're able to kind of come into the offices a little bit more or less, depending on your situation. What do you see changing in that messaging, or how we deliver that message, from a company perspective or an organizational perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. First, I want to say to the listeners, let's play some pivot bingo. Every time that somebody on this podcast will say the word pivot, because that might be the word of the year, everybody from PR and throughout will be pivoting in some way to adjust to the environment we have been in and changes to that environment. But that word of new normal, people don't like that. And it's hard to say we're going to get back to normal. It will be a new normal for us. So with that being said, the employees, it's very interesting because the employees and corporations so far with communications were really thrown into this like a fire drill, and we're learning on the go. So how many people out there never did a Teams call and now they're doing all Teams calls or Zoom calls? So everyone adapted very quickly. One of the things you have to look at, though, is how to refine that process. So companies will have to start looking at maybe possibly training their employees to do better with presenting online, sharing screens, things like that. The other thing is looking at empathy when you're communicating with employees. One of the things we talk about with this right now is, you can't just HR can't just put a flyer up in the kitchen by the coffee pot and assume everyone's going to read it and understand that there's some change in the organization or there's a new policy. So really focus on the idea that everything has to be communicated in a way that a virtual office will get it and read it and comprehend it. Some companies have already shifted to online, very quick videos from their president or from HR, pushing that out through an internal newsletter. Again, it's the idea of just over communicating if you can. And then the tone of that should be empathetic, understanding. Everyone is struggling. The nerves are frayed, of course. We've had a very long year, and there's still uncertainty. So keep that in mind with homeschooling and everyone working remotely and all of that. But with that being said, business is business. And so communicating to your employees has to also include your clear definition of what your expectations are, what the goals are for your employees. That can't be cast aside, because at the end of the day, we all have to perform and continue to do our jobs as best we can. And so that's the idea. Be empathetic, but also make sure you're communicating the goals, expectations, maybe setting up new ways of tracking those kind of things. Sometimes talk to some people that have said this has really forced them to look at goal tracking in a whole new way. And it's not just a timesheet anymore. And I will be interested, actually, from a personal note, of how many companies will take this on as the new norm and be way more comfortable with remote, distant working staff. I know that there are a lot of workers out there that are hands-on, and that can't be a possibility. But there are so many now that companies were just very traditional, and they felt if you weren't at your desk, you weren't working. Well, now they've been forced to figure out how to make that work. And so it will be for me, it's a curiosity of how many people will adapt to this and those kind of changes, and a cultural change that is going to be it's going to be a pin in the timeline of our country, our world. I'm sure of it, that we are going to look back, and at some point our grandkids are going to say, I can't believe everybody had to go to the office and sit at a desk. And that's where I'm curious how that will play out over a generation. The one thing I know we're going to talk about a little bit later is communicating to the consumer, but not just internal communications. I just want to touch on the idea that consumers are definitely looking for brands that they are perceiving as safe and minimizing this unnecessary risk. So regardless of what your product is, you have to have some point of underlying messaging about what you're doing to keep your customers safe. That's very important. Actually, I just saw a study. It was Ernst & Young that was saying that 26% of consumers that they surveyed were looking for brand products they trust to be safe. I mean, that's significant. So almost a quarter of the people making decisions out there about purchasing are looking at the safety over possibly even performance. And they're also looking for more healthy products. So if there's a way that you can emphasize something about your product that emphasizes the safety and the health aspects of it, that's important too. So we're going to touch more on the consumer side of it, but those are kind of the top line things I'm thinking of.
Hey, Rick, I think it's really important. The word that you said is empathy. And thinking about that deeper human connection that we were talking about just a little while ago, that's exactly the way to do it. I mean, I was thinking about it more from a visual perspective, but obviously we need to be empathetic across all of our written and whatever ways we're communicating with our audiences, whether they're internal or external.
Yeah, I liked what you were saying too about the visualization of people want to see people now. They need that human connection. So that part of it was very interesting. A lot of my world is words and your world is visual. And that was just, again, that struck a note with me that, yeah, these things will come together as we move forward.
Yeah, I think the old days of product shots on a plain colored background or a setting background are probably going to start to go by the wayside. Someone needs to be holding that product, interacting with it so that we can see a person and make that relationship.
Good segue. I want to go back around the horn and kick things back to Bill, thinking about the virtual environment a little more. Bill, we know reaching people through mobile devices is a growing part of digital marketing every year. This isn't a new trend. I'm not telling you something you haven't heard probably for the last decade or more with, all the devices in our hands, and every year there's a new model. But how do you see companies dedicating more resources to not only social media, but also, multimedia, the video clips, the stronger visual campaigns to connect more with their target audiences online? Like, what more do you think will come in 2021?
I think you're probably going to see a lot of product refinement is going to be the next couple phases, and making it, because truthfully, everyone, especially this year, had a lot of time to spend on devices. So they became kind of experts, and there's not a person that I know that can't fly through their phone through 20 different apps in 10 different seconds. So the idea is, if you're trying to deliver something in that digital space, it's got to get your attention, and it's got to be easy to use, because the worst thing you can do is try to do something in an app at this point and then have that just fail or be difficult to understand. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of trends towards upselling and making it really easy for you to spend money. And I know that that's happened to me recently. I was buying lunch online, and a pop-up showed up and asked me if I wanted a drink, and I hadn't thought about it. So I immediately purchased the drink, went in my cart, and I got it. So I think, and it was seamless, and it was literally one extra touch, and they got like $4 out of me for an iced tea. But I think that that's going to kind of be where you have to look at, in addition to getting your message in front of people, in that digital space, it's gotta have something for them to do when they get there. So I think that you're going to see a lot of marketing shifting towards very quick conversion, as opposed to necessarily trying to get somebody on board and get them to spend an extended amount of time, unless your product is spending time on a website. Like, social media, obviously they're going to try to keep you on there to see the ads that people are showing. But the people who are doing the advertising, once you have their attention with that ad, you're trying to get them to convert to a product very quickly. And I think you're going to see campaigns become a lot more focused on getting those conversions quickly. So that might be, when you go to a landing page, there might not be all the fluff at the top of the page anymore about the product and whatever it would say there. Here's product shots. Here's a video of people using it. Here's a description. Here's all the places we were featured in the news. It might just drop you off there and say, here it is, one or two quick, impactful bullet points, and then try to push them right to the shopping cart. I think that what you can do there, though, is going to be a lot of testing. So I think A/B testing is going to be really important to find out how you set those pages up to drive those conversions very quickly. It's something that's used a lot now, but I think that especially with mobile devices, you're going to see a lot more action and a lot less kind of intermediate content between what your ad is leading people to and what you're asking them to do at the end of the day. And I think that that's going to kind of be a big shift. And I think that's going to be kind of across the entire digital medium. Let's get them. And it's easy now. I mean, you can spend hundreds of dollars by double clicking a button on your phone. I mean, it's never been easier to spend money with the device in your pocket at all times. So I think you're going to see a lot of digital efforts pushing people towards getting those purchases done and getting them done really quickly.
Also a good point and a good segue for my question for Rick. I mean, Rick, we've talked about design trends like mobile first design and minimalism. And I'm wondering if you could, elaborate a little bit more for the listeners. Like, what do we mean when we talk about those terms? How do they factor into, 2021 projects or campaigns that you and your team will be working on next year?
Well, if you think about what Bill just said, how quickly people are scanning through apps and how seamlessly they need to function, that functionality actually starts as a product of design. So it needs to be designed in a way so that it's minimal, it's quick. People can inherently understand how that functionality works through the design characteristics. So that idea of using mobile design first, that can then play off into your other campaigns. What you're doing on your mobile platform, once again, we check our phones 150 times a day. So it's where people are seeing our brands first. So what we do then beyond that in other channels needs to mimic that same simplicity, that same style. That same streamlined functionality has to be part of the design. And one of the trends that also goes hand in hand with that is minimalism. We're starting to see in logo design, in layouts, once again, simple, clean, reduce the number of elements, reduce the clutter so that the impact of the visuals is immediately apparent. I'm seeing it in logo designs. We're even starting to adapt to that trend this year in what we're designing for clients, where the fewer the elements, the better. I mean, the simplest thing to think about the Target logo. I mean, it can't be any simpler than that. So that characteristic of minimalism and simplistic design, driving streamlined functionality, but it all starts with design and then it plays out across all of your channels as well.
Yeah, another good point. I mean, obviously we're talking through about a lot of things that impact different departments, but a lot of our departments, we work together on a daily basis to make it all work. And it starts at one place, and ends up impacting another teammate. And obviously we're all servicing the same client at the end of the day, trying to, tell that brand message, get that strategy implemented, which leads me to some other trends I was thinking about, Rick, from a PR communication side, one thing that we didn't touch on yet, and maybe you can elaborate more, is, the media landscape. It's shifted a ton this year because of COVID, with furloughs and, to your word before, pivoting coverage more on the big news, the hard hitting news. COVID cases, it's in the news every day. The election in the news almost every day. How will companies and organizations get news covered next year? Like, what are some tips? What are some things you expect you'll see from organizations, and how we're going to help them get covered when, the media has become so fragmented in, this modern time that we're all living in?
Yeah, it was something that was already happening to our industry before COVID. And Jay, with your extensive background as a journalist, you lived through this as well. What I'm about to talk about is the landscape change at media companies and what we would call traditional media outlets. Just saw a stat that says there are 6 PR professionals now in the world for every journalist. So what that says is the journalism field is shrinking, the PR field is growing, and that is creating this overload of incoming messages to the journalists that are working today. That's significant. And again, that was something that was happening even before COVID, but because of now, like you said, downsizing even more at these media outlets, it's going to be even more challenging to get the attention of the few journalists that are working today. So one of the things I was saying even before COVID was, as a public relations person, I consider I have a client, but then I have a second client, which is the journalist that I'm trying to work with. I look at that journalist as a client because I'm also trying to see, how do I take something off the journalist's plate to make their job easier so that they can tell my story. One of the things, again, is if you would start seeing these statistics that I was looking up, I won't bore anybody with them, but they was talking about how many incoming emails a journalist, a PR News I believe it was PR News, did a survey of journalists. And just the sheer number of incoming messages and email pitches every day is overwhelming. So keep that in mind when you think you have this fantastic story, or your CEO thinks it's a great story. It might be, but you are now competing with hundreds, thousands of incoming emails for a very small barrel of journalists. So how does your story add to what the media is covering is one of the first things I look at. How do you on-ramp? One of the things that I have found in my own experience is it is a really hard sell to get a journalist to start something from scratch. So if they're covering something that's a trend, an ongoing story in the national conversation, if you come in and say, I have this great story, it doesn't tie in with anything else that is going on, and we need you to really spend about 6 months diving into this and doing a bunch of research. Thanks, but we aren't going to be able to help you at this time. You're not going to get that story told with those journalists. So you do have to look at them as a client. You have to look at the national conversation, and you have to find out, how does my product or my story tie in with that in some way? And it doesn't have to be apples to apples, but that will help you, like I said, on-ramp. You're not building a new road. Try to on-ramp your story to what is already taking place. The other thing is creating human connection. Again, back to what Creative Rick was saying, if this is PR Rick, Creative Rick and I were talking about the idea of this human connection, but now there's this little twist. It's a human connection. Well, this might even tie in with what Bill was saying as well, is it's a human connection, but it's an online human connection. And so there's a jump there. And so the idea is, how do you now make your message connect to what is happening in the world, but also have it connect with what consumers are doing, how they're acting, where they're getting their information, where they're doing commerce. So 2 examples I had that I thought were very appropriate. IKEA, they have a new campaign, Make Home Count. And if you look that up, and there's videos and things that go along with that, is they're really talking about IKEA and the fact that more people are staying home. And then that's their theme, is make home count. The other one that I looked at that I thought was appropriate was Nike or Nike. I'll be curious who says which way, Nike or Nike. They have, their campaign was play inside and also play for the world. And these were hashtags that what they were doing was they were trying to get these athletes and people that were engaged in all of these different things, running, exercise, whatever. They were sharing now how they were staying active at home during the lockdown. So again, it's that shared community that we're all dealing with this same pandemic. We are all secluded in a way, but yet we still have our lives and things that connect us as human beings. So those were just two examples. Now, those guys aren't our clients, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. But again, if you look those up, you see how they play along with this idea. The other thing, again, that plays in with the resurgence of human interest stories as what will be hooks or be of interest to journalists in telling. So keep that in mind too. Maybe it's a human interest story about people that produce the products that you are selling. You'll see Amazon recently was really highlighting their employees as part of the Amazon commercials that they were running. And then this is my biggest pro tip for any PR folks out there is, again, back to the idea, journalism. Journalists are overwhelmed. And here's my tip, is put multiple story ideas in one pitch. So it's 5 story ideas that are just little tasters, just a little appetizer. And that way they open one email, they quickly breeze through 5, 7, whatever it might be, but digestible in a few seconds. They look at the headline, they read the little teaser, there's maybe a click link that takes you to a fuller press release online or something of that nature. But the idea of sending somebody a one-off pitch that's multiple pages as a press release, that's not the way we do it anymore. And again, imagine very limited time, overwhelmed. If they put eyes on your pitch, make it worth their while. And so those are my tips for, again, the pre-COVID and moving forward after COVID public relations and media world.
In the spirit of the holidays, spirit of Home Alone, classic movie. I don't want you guys to get scared now, but I'm going to ad-lib a little bit. I'm going to ask you all the same question. I'm going to see how y'all want to answer it. The idea of companies shifting back, communicating, the back to normal, life after COVID messaging, that we're all waiting to do that. How do we begin to make the transition? Like how do you can't just go cold turkey and then, next December come back and say everything's fine. What do we do in the interim to kind of message that? And I guess I would start with Rick Dunlap, from the PR perspective, what's a tip you can do to make the transition? And then, Bill and Rick Holberg, you guys can chime in on that. How do we begin to, message, this quote post-COVID world, or, we're back to normal without just saying we're back to normal?
I'm going to use the word pivot. No, I'm going to get out ahead of the other guys and say pivot. Yeah. So mark your bingo cards. I said it. No. So dealing with this is like, I look at this like everyone in our world, in marketing, communications, public relations, we are definitely dealing with what is going to be a national hangover with consumers. They are going to have a COVID hangover for quite a while. So one of the things that I would say in the interim, or the thought process here is, don't just throw out the plans or messaging that you had prior to COVID, but also do not just relaunch those messages like COVID never happened. The last thing I think any brand or any consumer wants to see from a brand is ignoring what has happened this past year. So, one of the things is take some time right now as we're transitioning, and hopefully sooner than we even thought with vaccines and that sort of stuff. The faster we are transitioning, don't wait, but get out those communications plans, those themes, the tone, dust it off, but alter it in a way that adjusts to the new day. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think the messaging out there needs to be hope. It needs to be about the future. It needs to be about doing things together, coming together again. I think those things are going to be very hopeful and helpful. I look to, the recovery of a natural disaster like New Jersey was so praised for their Jersey Strong, or stronger than the hurricane. I think it's a lot of that same type of morale building that we need to really push in the coming weeks, months, and get us ramped up to the idea that there will be a norm again. But the idea is we have to come together and kind of pick up after the storm. We have to pick up and rebuild together.
One of the big themes that I would hope to see is going to be hope. And I think not necessarily that needs to be the backing theme, but it needs to be kind of you're highlighting this excitement about things, becoming more accessible or more populated or more exciting again. And I think that that's going to be really important, because that's going to hit both crowds of people, because there's no secret right now that half of, there's a large contingent of people out there that believe that, what we're currently experiencing is not necessary, and that we could be out there and that we could be doing whatever we wanted. And there's a large contingent of people that have been in lockdown and they're very hopeful for a day that we don't have to be that way anymore. But I think the message of not dwelling on what happened, but dwelling on or being excited about what's coming is really important. But I also think that the interesting thing about this is going to be the absolute uncertainty of the situation, because if that's all we learned last year is things changed every single day, and we really had to do a lot of reactive and stay agile to make sure your campaigns work. And so I think that in the digital space, the nice thing is you've got these tools to measure all of those outcomes almost in real time. So I think that, as digital marketers, when you're going out there with campaigns, you can kind of test one set of messaging against another in real time and find out, hey, are more people clicking when I have my message kind of ignoring the fact that this existed and just talking about that it's open? Or if we kind of give it a tint of, hey, things are getting better, come out and see us, we have all these great things for you, you'll be able to measure the success of those messages almost in a real-time environment to find out how you can refine that message to your audience. Because the same strategy isn't going to work for every single industry, and it's not going to work for every single business. So I think that that's going to be the really important part coming out of it, is staying agile, but also keeping a very close pulse on what is working and what isn't working. Because if there's we don't know. You can't say now for certain that this is going to be the way it works. What you can do is bake in your analytics early to make sure that you can kind of get there and make sure you're doing the best advertising you can and learn as the situation evolves. Because between the vaccines and everything else that's going on, no one knows for sure what the timeline is. All you can do, especially in a digital space, is have your campaigns ready and check to see how well they're working and try what you can, because it's kind of it's a time to do that. I think it's a great time to do that, to kind of hone your messaging and find out what's working and what isn't.
Bill, and I think that idea of data, even from a design perspective, it's really important, because we think about designers as trying to get into the audience's mind, into their hearts, into their emotions. But at the same time, and we need to do that in order to make a really deep connection in whatever we're doing, whether it's messaging or whether it's visuals or any kind of context for the brand. But at the same time, we need that data analysis to tell us what is working. And then we can do the same thing. I'm going to say it, Rick, we can pivot our designs here to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We're not breaking from reality and saying this never happened. We're facing it head on. And we're staying current with what the consumers are looking for, not only from a messaging standpoint, but from a visual standpoint as well. And that data analysis is really important. And I mean, even thinking about it, you mentioned A/B testing. We can do that from a visual perspective too, not only just messaging. So plenty of options for our clients to understand exactly what messages resonate most fully with their audiences.
Yeah, the only term that I heard this year that just kind of made me think about what the messages need to be from a marketing perspective, I don't know if you guys heard it, but the term doom scrolling, where there was just so much stuff going on to worry about that people were just locked into their phones, flipping through them and just seeing bad news after bad news after bad news. And that just, that's why I think testing and controlling the messaging coming out of this thing is people might not want to see it anymore. Your product might stand out if you decide that if you've got a safe environment for people to be in and your product is viable given whatever the regulatory or current, restrictions are, and you just don't mention it and put it out there, that's something that might catch somebody's attention because you might be the standout that, not that you're not concerned about it or you haven't taken those precautions, and not to say you're past it, but you have a product and it's just one of those things where it kind of is a break from that idea that everything you see has just been tainted with this message of COVID for good reason. But there's eventually going to be a time where it's going to be refreshing not to have that. And so it's kind of finding when that message can be delivered and how that message can be delivered, which I think is going to be, that's what we're going to be looking for, in the next couple of months.
And Bill, I'm encouraged by, the work that you do and the type of analytics that you pull from your work. You may be in that industry that is actually finding out ahead of schedule and plugged in really to the pulse of how fast people are recovering emotionally from this. And I love the idea of putting two kind of messages out there and measuring them and seeing which ones are catching, which ones aren't. Again, you're in a piece of this industry that could really be plugging everybody into navigating our way back.
I love this discussion, and I'm going to borrow that message of hope that you all left me with. And, as we think about 2021, what lies ahead, I want to thank everyone for listening to the Adlibber, and we hope that you all learned a few things from our team of experts here at Gavin. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Adlibber podcast. To find new episodes and get more content from our team here at Gavin, make sure to visit our website at adlibberpodcast.com. The Adlibber is also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.